Back to another power parsha. This week's Torah portion is Parshat Terumah. Terumah means to donate, to give. And this is the week where finally God's vast eternal plan, the reason for which he creates the world, which is to have a home in the world, gets set into action. And we're instructed on the building of the tabernacle, which was the portable temple that escorted the Jewish people through the desert, through the wilderness, eventually evolving into the temple which stood on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. And we're told that everybody was drafted into donating and participating in building this home for God because it is a communal effort. It's not the responsibility of a single person, but everybody as well. Every individual has to contribute. And they would contribute zahav, v'chesef, v'nechoshet, gold, silver, and copper. Now, what jumps out immediately is if we're going to build a home for God, shouldn't we just build it out of gold, the finest material? Why would we have to include silver and copper? Silver, okay, we can make an argument. Silver is also a very precious metal, radiant and beautiful, but copper, why copper? And this goes back to what we just mentioned, that everybody has to build a home for God. Everybody is drafted in. We'll get to that in a moment. But first, zahav, kesef, and nechoshet, gold, silver, and copper represent different types of material, or different levels or aspects of the physical material universe. And what we're told is that everything has to be drafted into building a home for God. We don't just build a home for God out of gold, which is the finest, even you might call it transcendent sort of type of material, one that is really reserved for really special things and special occasions. It's not an everyday kind of usage kind of metal. Silver as well. You can say we can build a home for God. And I've also refined it's not as magnificent and precious and valuable as gold, but still a very special and important material. But copper, which represents sort of the coarseness of the material world, that would seem to be a material that should not be used, would be inappropriate to use in the building of God's home. And yet the Torah tells us we have to use all of these materials because God wants a home in this lowest world. And he wants the home to be in every aspect of this world, so that even the things that are low, even the things that seem to be inappropriate or inhospitable to hosting God in this world, even those things have to be elevated and turned into a home for God. In fact, that's what the word terumah means. The root of the word terumah, from the word Rome, which means exalted, elevated, lifted. We take everything in the material world, no matter how lowly it might seem, and we elevate it and make it into a home for God. Gold, silver, and copper also represent types of people, personalities. We have people that are silver, they're radiant, they shine, they're consistent, and that represents righteous people, people that live a righteous, consistent life. Gold, which is even more radiant and more precious. Gold represents a Jew who's risen above their challenges and changed, transformed themselves. So they've sort of transcended their own nature and reached even higher. That would be like a Baal Tshuva, somebody who reaches even higher, a higher level of consciousness, a higher level of living, a more passionate and determined and focused devotion to God. But copper represents everybody else. Copper represents a Jew who is struggling to be good, struggling to serve God, struggling to be them, live as the best version of themselves every day. And so the Torah tells us everything, as we mentioned, gold, silver, and copper, every single one of us. We can't build a mishkan, we can't build a home for God if it doesn't include every single one of us. So every type of Jew. And additionally, within ourselves, we have gold, we have silver, and we have copper. Those aspects of our lives that are like gold, those are like silver, those are like copper. And we might think, I'm going to give God those parts of myself that are holy or that are directed at him. But there's other things, the resistant parts, the doubt, the questioning, the challenges, the hardships, that ugliness, that's something that I'm not going to, that's not something that can be transformed and redirected to serve God. And so our task is to invite all parts of ourselves to, as whole and wholesome people, to add every single part of ourselves. There's no area in our own lives, in our psyche, that is not appropriately directed in serving God. And so, that's the lesson, that we have to take all aspects of our lives and direct them towards God. Now, There's a famous saying by the great Hasidic master Rabbi Mendel of Kotzk, the Kotzker Rebbe, who commented on a verse from last week's Torah portion. We read last week, "Anshe kodesh tihunli," you should be holy people for me, or to me. So says Rabbi Mendel of Kotzk that God is basically saying in that verse, I've got plenty, of angels, plenty of the righteous. I have seraphs, and I've got Ophanim, and you name the type of angel, I've got them, and they're all wonderful, and they're all divine and magnificent. But what I want is Anshe Kodesh. I want holy people. I want the human being in their human experience, with their frailties, with their limitations, with the mistakes they make, and their flaws and their faults. That's what I want. I want you to be holy. I don't want the angels. I want you to be a holy person. And whenever we give of ourselves to God, whenever we take an aspect of ourselves, that heals those lower parts, that heals those and changes those lower parts of ourselves. And that's really how this whole building a Mishkan enterprise works. What does it mean to make this world a home for God? Take materials like gold, silver, and copper, like we're talking about, and make them holy. In very practical terms, everything that happens in our lives, when we give a part of that to a higher cause, that elevates everything. So think, for example, when you read in the news that a human being did something really, really bad that they shouldn't have done, you can't help but thinking sometimes, well, there goes the human race, right? You feel deflated, you feel lower. As a species, we seem to be failing. And conversely, when somebody does something really remarkable, like man walks on the moon, and you think, wow, look how amazing human beings are, that elevates the collective a feeling and sense of humanity. We rise when we see humanity at its best and its greatest. We recognize that we have that inside of us ourselves. We're capable of such good things. So even though it was another person, somebody I don't know, did something that I probably can't do on my own, but nevertheless, because we are both human beings, the fact that a human can experience that or achieve that elevates all of us. And the same is true with ourselves. We spend a lot of our time working to make a living. When we donate to charity, when we give a minimum of 10%, right, and capping it at 20% of our income to charity, what happens is it's not just that 10% or 20% becomes holy, becomes consecrated, but all of everything I've earned and all of the work and all that effort that I've put in is elevated as a result of the 10% that you give away to charity. And the same is true when we serve God. The energy that is expended in serving God, which is from the food I ate, from the exercising, right? And then the food got to my table how through a whole series of production and deliveries and development and cultivation. All of those things, all of those parts of it are elevated in that process as well. So when we engage with the material world and we direct and focus our energies and efforts so that we can make this world a home for God, not only are the actual materials that we're quote unquote donating to the temple, not only are those holy and become a place for God, a home for God, but everything that led to that moment and everything connected to that made that moment possible is also elevated in the process. And so the same is true with us. We can give of our gold, we can give of our silver, we can give of our copper. We have to remember that when we're giving to God, we have to give from all those parts, not to isolate them, not to fragment them, not just to give from my holiness or my goodness, my kindness, but every part of myself needs to be involved in making myself, my own personal life, my home, my body, my environment, making that a home for God. And when we invite all of those parts into that building of the tabernacle, God says, as he does in the opening of the 6th Torah portion, make me that home and I will dwell in it, or I will dwell more accurately in them, meaning in each and every one of us, in our hearts, in our minds, and in our lives.